for a fireside chat. Oh, looks like the best I can do today is a space heater and some candles, and if that's not a metaphor for my life lately, I don't know what is. Well, hello! I fixed my fireplace. Here we are. We are talking about not how I managed to fix my fireplace, but how I managed to haul my butt all the way to Alaska for a month, all by myself without incident. Mostly without incident. Anyway, hi, I'm Allison, a tiny trailer traveler and hobby farm hopeful who sometimes wanders off into the most remote wilderness on the planet for a month for fun. Join me for a little fireside chat on the longest road trip I've ever been on, and maybe perhaps the most challenging road trip I've ever been on, I don't know. Yeah, it was the most challenging road trip I've ever been on. Not because anything went wrong, but because it was so stinking long. Why? Why would I do that? Because it's fun? Because I can? Because I can. Because I can. Pull up a seat by the fire or in the passenger seat, whichever you prefer, and I'll tell you a few fun stories along the way, and maybe you and I will both figure out somewhere along the way how I survived this trip. Oh my gosh, where do I even start? I'll pull up my notes. Because I have notes I make. Actually, that's the first thing we'll talk about. I start with a map, a little idea in my heart, maybe a little nagging feeling in my brain. I want to go explore that. It just happens. These things happen to me. So I grew up listening to my grandparents talk about their drive in their RV, and that's probably where the idea, that little seed got planted in wee little adventure, Allison, and it eventually germinated into all of this. All it takes is that one little seed, and I am on a map measuring and calculating and planning how would I get there, how many days is it gonna take me to drive there, and then at whatever point I open up a blank document, it's on. We are planning, it is on. So I start with an outline of what I want to accomplish. This trip is relatively simple because all I really cared about accomplishing was getting to Alaska. It's one of those scenarios where the trip is the point, not the destination. The destination, while great and important, and I will talk about Alaska, it really wasn't the point of this trip. The point of this trip was literally just me saying, I wonder what that would be like. And that's when some of my best ideas. So if you too, friend, are wondering what that would be like, I'm here to tell you. I wonder what that would be like. And we're gonna do that trip one way or another, someday or another. And so I build a rough itinerary around the things that I want to experience when I want to go there. And I say rough itinerary because I don't necessarily put dates to it. Often I will eventually put dates to it when I need to make reservations for campsites and things like that. When I need to take time off of work, can I work on the way? I start to play with the calendar a little bit, and of course that also involves knowing what time of year to go somewhere. So pro tip, if you have never driven in the snow before, maybe you don't drive to Alaska in the fall or winter. So clearly I was gonna go to Alaska in the summer, although part of me that experiences the call of the void or something also wonders what it would be like to make that drive in the winter. Maybe you'll get to tag along with me on that endeavor someday. No, I'm kidding. Don't do that, Allison, that's a bad idea. Anyway, this itinerary in particular is very simple. You need to get there and you need to get back. And at every point in needing there and needing to get back, there are very few decisions you need to make in your route because there are not that many routes. So this is a relatively easy trip to plan. It is a difficult trip to make, very easy to plan, we'll just say that. Choosing your route. What route should you take? And at the end, I will maybe make a recommendation, but when you're considering your route, there are essentially, I would say, 3 ways, 3 routes to get there and back. Of course, if you are coming from the eastern United States, you're going to have to drive west for quite a while. I'm not familiar with how you do that, but once you are in the west, once you are in British Columbia, you have a couple of routes that you can go. Take what I will call the eastern route, which goes up eastern British Columbia up into the Yukon, and then you will meet up with the western route and then cut over to the Alaska border. And then you have a choice of a couple of border crossings in Alaska. There is a southern border crossing and there is a northern border crossing. I went through both, so I made this as much of a loop where I experienced as little repetition in my routes as possible. Do I recommend that? Stay tuned. The second route I would call the western route, where it hugs a little more closely the coast of British Columbia and the Yukon, and you will then meet up with the eastern route, cut over to Alaska. And then route number 3, you can take the ferry. So I thought it might be fun because most people who have taken the ferry, anyone that I've ever asked who's taken the ferry is like, when I told them I was going to Alaska, they were like, oh, are you gonna take the ferry? You should take the ferry, it's beautiful. Well, if you have not priced out the trip on the ferry to go the full length of the Canadian coastline, you're in for a little bit of sticker shock, as I was. I thought, I'll take the western route, appeared more interesting to me, and so I figured, I'll take the western route up, and then I'll take the ferry home. When I priced out the ferry for 1 person, 1 dog, 1 truck, 1 trailer for the entire trip, no accommodations, mind you, I would be staying in my trailer, $6,000. $6,000. Ferry was out. Ferry was a no-go. No thank you, ma'am. Do you know how much fun I could have almost anywhere on the planet for $6,000? So that left me with 2 routes, and I figure A, will make it a loop and I will experience both routes. So there we are on the road, and I decided, well, the western route looks more interesting to me, so I will get the eastern route out of the way first. And that's what I did. So I drove and drove and drove and drove. So now that we are all planned and on the road, I think it's worth talking a little bit about what to bring. It's probably going to be more than you're used to bringing. If you have not been on a trip like this before, I don't think this is the one for you. I have other recommendations that you should tackle first before trying something like this. But anyway, I am going to assume that if you are traveling this trip, you have some road tripping experience. That's why you're in my passenger seat today, and I will be escorting you safely from the comfort of your passenger seat next to my fireplace, whatever seat you picked earlier. But let's talk about what to bring. And when you're talking about what to bring, the aim of the game is self-sufficiency. You will be on your own. Solo means solo, one. nobody out there to help you almost ever for hundreds of miles at a time. You are going to be so on your own for so many things. I don't think I had a hot meal in 4 days. There aren't a lot of restaurants, and when I say not a lot of restaurants, I could maybe count on one hand the number of places to stop, period, that I remember on one hand. I can count them on one hand. There's not that many. Their hours are short. They're not always open. There aren't hotels. There's like a couple of hotels on the entire route, not nearly enough to handle the number of people that need them. So if you call a tow truck out here, if you like get into some trouble and you need help, first of all, there might not be cell reception for days. Keep that in mind. If you do get a hold of somebody, or you have to hitchhike or something, which I don't recommend, don't do that. We will talk about that later as well. Don't hitchhike if you get into trouble. But once you reach help, it will take them hours to days to get to you, and that is if help is available. Keep in mind that we are traveling during the summer, and that is fire season in the northwestern United States and Canada. At this particular time in 2022, in July, a lot of the routes that you're seeing, a couple of weeks before I drove these, they were closed, and the Yukon and British Columbia and Alaska were asking people not to travel this way. And so I kind of lucked out on when I planned to do this, because within a couple of weeks all of the highways reopened, but they were begging people not to travel because they would not be able to help you if you got into some trouble. If another wildfire springs up, or if you get trapped between wildfires, the scale of this place is so huge that you can get boxed in without knowing it. And so anyway, all that to say, if you need a tow truck, if you need medical help, any kind of help at all, you're gonna be waiting for a really long time. So being self-sufficient is extremely important, and that means having enough water, food, fuel, everything that you need for yourself to keep yourself alive and safe for potentially many days at a time. That's actually not something that's typical for me, is I don't always pack 100% self-sufficient because I live in a much more populated country than Canada. If you know anything about Canada, you know that most of the population is in the very southern parts of Canada, near the border with the United States, and the population above, I don't know what parallel? The population above that parallel is pretty sparse. There aren't a lot of fuel stations. We will talk about the fuel next. So you're on your own. If you need tools, I don't know where you're going to get, so bring some tools. Any tools that you might need to fix common things that would go wrong with your vehicle or your trailer or whatever you're taking. I didn't see a single motorcyclist with fewer than 2 tires spare with them, so you might end up replacing more than 1 tire on this trip, no joke. Let's just talk about fuel, because that's going to be the scarcest, most important resource on your way to and from Alaska. And if you don't want to spend time thinking and planning down to the hour how you will be traveling, you're going to want to carry extra fuel. And honestly, if you are an anxious traveler at all, even if you might not need the fuel, I only ended up needing my extra fuel once, and we'll talk about that when we talk about safety. So fuel is also a safety matter that I will get to, but bring as much extra fuel as you can because you might need it. Gas stations aren't open 24 hours. Bring spare fuel. That's like a must. It's an absolute must. Even if you don't use it, you will have like so much peace of mind. Not to mention, fuel is going to be very expensive. It was like almost $4 a liter in some places, which at the time, like I would say I paid $9 to $10 a gallon in parts of the remote Yukon. So If anything, if you are on your way back and you have not used your extra fuel, it would be cost effective to do so when you are in the remotest parts of your trip, because you will save some money. In Philippine, Alaska, the fuel is much cheaper in Alaska. It's really abrupt going from the Yukon to Alaska in one day and paying like $11 a gallon for fuel that day, and then paying like $2.50, $3.50 a gallon. If you know anything about Alaska, you know that it is known for its oil industry, so the fuel is much cheaper in Alaska. So I calculated roughly my fuel costs, and I would say $2,000 to $3,000 on fuel there and back in total. But again, it was less than the ferry at $6,000. So we've talked about the fuel. Now, here is the thing that I was not expecting to happen to me during this trip, and it is a first for me in my entire life. It was so weird. I explain this. Well, most of northern BC and all of the Yukon and a good deal of Alaska are this certain kind of forest. It's a very hardy forest, but it's not a very diverse forest. And this one, basically it seems to me like this one tree only grows for days, literally days. So I was driving, chasing the horizon, and you come over a hill, and as far as the eye can see, it's just that one tree. And to control for wildfires, they mow like the same 20, 30 feet or whatever the whole way. So there's road, you got like 20 feet on either side of just like trim brush, and the same tree densely packed for as far as your eye can see. You go over the next hill, you find the next horizon, as far as the eye can see, and it all looks the same. And you might be listening to music or something and things are good. Feels like you've been driving for hours. And you look on a map and you look down at the clock and you've been driving for 5 minutes. You just thought you spent all day chasing that horizon, up and down, trees as far as you can see. Spend 5 minutes. 5 minutes. And then you might say, oh, it feels like it's only been 5 minutes. I'm not gonna look at the clock. I'm not gonna look at the clock. Don't do it. Don't look at the clock. You know it hasn't been that long. Oh, it's been 5 hours. 5 hours went by. It felt like 5 minutes, and 5 minutes felt like 5 hours. I had to actually stop listening to music and put on audiobooks so I had some sense of time and place and scale of what I was doing, because the scale of it all was absolutely breaking my brain. Maybe it was a combination of everything looking the same for as far as I could see, and then knowing I would not be at my destination for many more days to come made me feel really claustrophobic. Leave it up to me to feel claustrophobic in one of the world's largest forests. I basically lived for 4 or 5 days in a time warp. I would wake up when I wasn't tired anymore, and I would drive until I was tired again. I didn't know where I was most of the time. Everything looked the same. There was no cell phone reception to check. All I had was the digital clock on my dashboard and a panting dog in the back, and enough audiobooks to get me through it all. So that was helpful. So add to your packing list a lot of different things to listen to, because you might start going crazy if you listen to the same thing for 70 hours. I think maybe the time warp issue, oh my gosh. Let's do the time warp again. Sorry, I had to. I'm about to say time warp a lot. Living in this time warp for so many days I have never done before. The United States is, while it has a lot of open desert and rural places, none of these rural places and open deserts generally take more than a day to drive through. 2 days possibly, but I have never once in all of my travels in the United States gone more than a day without cell phone service while I was driving. Like, there just aren't that vast swaths of land with no cell phone service. But there are vast swaths of land with no cell phone service in Canada and Alaska because there are no people there. This time warp really got me. Let's do the time warp. I knew eventually if I keep driving, I have plenty of fuel. If I just keep driving, I'll get there eventually, which is sometimes a strategy I use when I'm hiking and I'm getting annoyed that it's taking me so long to get somewhere, is if I just keep putting one foot in front of the other, I will get there. And that is what kept me going and kept me from going absolutely bonkers while I was driving for 4 days in a forest that never seemed to change. So be prepared for that. Breaking up this time warp, let's do the time warp again. Sorry. Not only are the audiobooks and gas station stops, which again, there aren't that many, are the Alaska Highway Classic construction sites. There are only so many months out of the year, very few months in fact, that one can do construction on the Alaska-Canada highways. So it all gets done during the summer. That is when it's not on fire. So you will wait at construction sites. Sometimes road closures last a whole day. I didn't run into any of those. At most I found I waited around for like an hour on one of. You might find a highway closed for a few hours. There will be places in the road where calling it a highway seems a bit laughable. It's mud. It's gonna be muddy. Even in the summer, you're gonna encounter mud. There were a couple of times that you'll see along the way where I did go into 4-wheel drive, and some of those were in construction zones because there was no road. So be patient, be prepared to wait. Also, maybe be prepared to make friends with the person standing holding the sign, because y'all might be like the only people out there for like hundreds of miles. So I find that the construction crew can be very chatty when you're waiting around. There were a few of those, and if I was not feeling very social, I would roll up my windows, and that still doesn't stop them from making conversation, which is fine. I get it. It must be very lonely out there. There is this one instance, story time. I did encounter a flagger, and I slowed down and I stopped, and we made friendly conversation, and then another car pulled up behind me after like 20 minutes. He went back and chatted with them, and they looked like they were chatting. I was doing something, and then I look up and I look in my rearview mirror, and this construction worker is in the middle of the road with his sign dancing and stripping while the people in the vehicle behind me had gotten out and had started filming him. I assume for like a TikTok or something, in the middle of the Alaska-Canada highway. I didn't have that one on my bingo card. So speaking of time warp, sorry, I'm not gonna do it this time. Let's do the time warp. So a good sign that the time warp is ending is when one arrives in Dawson City. But Dawson City is its own time warp. I don't think it has changed much since like the 1800s. I know that it has, but it really doesn't, you know, it looks like a city lost to time, and it looks the way that I remember it from an old John Wayne movie. I believe it's called North to Alaska, and I remember watching old John Wayne movies with my dad growing up, And that was one that I remembered, and I remember hearing that name. Maybe we can blame John Wayne for part of this. It used to just be like a mining outpost, and it still looks like that today. I don't know if that's because they deliberately preserve it that way, or if it's because it's just hard to get construction equipment up to Dawson City in the Yukon Territory. Maybe a bit of both, actually. But it looks like a city that time just completely forgot. It's kind of fun. And it did feel like being in a John Wayne movie, so that was kind of fun too. So at the city limits of Dawson City, there is the Yukon River that is quite large. You are about to cross a threshold that will put you at the top of the world highway. But you need to get across that really big Yukon River, and that's where the ferry comes in. I don't know how people used to cross the river, but this little tiny ferry is not many steps above its history. Travel across the river has not advanced all that much over the years. It was a little bit nerve-wracking seeing this like really large RV driving onto the ferry. Although watching that made it a little less, made me a little less nervous that it could handle my truck and trailer. So when there is a large RV on board, you're not getting a whole lot more vehicles on board though. So after you take this not super advanced or large ferry across the water, bless its little heart, you are now at the threshold of the top of the world highway, which was my favorite part of the trip, and I would love to drive again someday, and I recommend other people to drive it if they ever get the chance and they have the vehicle capable of doing so. The vehicle capable of doing so being highly dependent on the weather and condition of the road. This is like a seriously fun road to drive, and it's because it's a little bit squirrely. Who doesn't like a bit of danger in their driving? I like a bit of danger when I'm 3,000 miles from home and 2 days from help. But anyway, the roads, a long time ago, the top of the world highway was actually paved, and it has since been left to the elements and is no longer paved. And I'm pretty sure I didn't encounter any pavement at all. I don't know, there's some kind of like magical mud on that thing that is very slippery, and it's kind of fun to drive because there's nobody really around. So I could slip and slide around a little bit in my trailer and see how that felt. That was really fun. Is that a good idea? No. Do I recommend you do that? No, absolutely not. Don't do that. But I found it very entertaining. So there's, I don't know, maybe it's like a layer of clay or something under the layer of mud, under this like thin sheen of water from the constant mist that was coming down. It was like ice in some places. It was very enjoyable to drive, and it was probably the longest that I spent in four-wheel drive. So heads up, if that's not your jam, then maybe avoid the top of the world highway. But if that sounds fun to you, read on. When I did finally finish the trip to go into Chicken, Alaska, yes, like Chicken, Alaska, that's a real place. It is a real place, and I believe there's something like 20 people, according to the last census, who live in Chicken, Alaska. But it's basically just a gas station. That's like the whole purpose of the town, I think, as is the purpose of a lot of towns along this trip. But when I pulled into Chicken, Alaska, these two motorcyclists pulled up next to me at the gas station, the pump on the other side of me, and started looking. I see them like peeking out behind the pump. I can't remember who. They got my attention though and started asking me some questions. Hey, did you just come from Dawson City today? Yes, I did. How can you tell? And of course they laughed because my entire truck was covered end to end in mud. So these motorcyclists They asked a few more questions about the condition of the road, and I showed them some video that I had taken, and they actually decided against driving that way that day. Yeah, they saw the condition of my vehicle and heard my story and decided, no, absolutely not for us. And I can't blame them. They weren't, they were on really heavy touring bikes, which I think might be a really bad idea on such slick roads, which is what they also determined. So after I made my way over the top of the world highway, came over the border, had that odd encounter with the motorcyclists in Chicken, Alaska. Chicken, I love it. Chicken, it's such a great name for a town. It's genius. I'm gonna have to look this up. I don't know how it came to be named Chicken, Alaska, and now I'm dying to know. After Chicken, Alaska, I took some more really like rural highway, albeit not on the top of the world. It didn't feel top of the world. It was more like in the river canyons. I took that to Fairbanks, and then I spent the night in Fairbanks because Fairbanks to Dawson City, it took all day. It was a very long drive. I was ready to be done. And then the next morning, I went onward to Denali. I guess is maybe you could call the destination of the trip, because at this point it was my birthday. And I had kind of planned, you know, this to be a birthday trip, so let's just call Denali the ultimate destination of the trip. I did spend a week there, which you would think would be a lot of time to do some hiking and sightseeing and stuff, and you would be correct, but not that correct, because one thing to know about Denali currently and probably in the future is that almost all of it is only accessible by park shuttle, and you need to ride the shuttle to get most places in the park. You can't actually drive into Denali most of the way. The plague was at this time such that I wasn't too hot on sharing a bus with strangers during busy season in a national park. So I went ahead and just did a couple of little trails in Denali and then found something else to do for my birthday. So I didn't actually end up exploring Denali a whole lot, but I did do something really fun near Denali for my birthday, which was take a little whitewater rafting trip. It was just super nice to enjoy the scenery from a different point of view, not from the truck. Finally, it was really nice to just get out of the car and get some fresh air, quite frankly. But I am bummed I didn't get to do a lot of hiking in Denali, and the hiking that I tried didn't last that long. Because here, another side story, there's a lot of wildlife in Denali, people. It is, and in Alaska and the Yukon and northern BC in general, there is so much wildlife. I grew up near a national forest, and I have never seen so much wildlife in my life. This is like the one place on the planet where I have seen the most wildlife that I have ever seen. It's really incredible. I haven't seen a moose since I lived in the woods as a little tiny child, and I saw, I don't know, dozens of moose. I stopped counting at like 7. There were so many, and bears, black bears, grizzly bears everywhere. And yeah, okay, grizzly bear story. I didn't get a lot of hiking done in Denali because the days that I had saved for hiking, a grizzly bear, whom I suspect to be the same grizzly bear on both occasions, because it was at the same trailhead on the same trail on 2 different days. I tried to hike this trail, the one that was accessible by personal vehicle because I didn't want to ride the bus. This bear got in my way both days. I mean, it's that bear's territory. It's their trail. It's not my trail. And this bear was eating both times I came upon it, or each bear was eating when I came upon them. It looked like the same bear. So one day I go out and they're turning people around from the parking lot because there is a grizzly bear right there, like digging up a like log for termites. It's like ripping its way into this log like very aggressively, and this like light tuft of fur that grizzly bears have on the back of their neck was like whipping around. This bear was just going at this log. Probably smart to turn people around from that situation. People cannot be trusted around even docile wildlife, much less a ravenous grizzly bear. So that day didn't work out. I come back the next day and I start up the trail, and I run into a ranger like almost immediately. I like go around a corner from the trailhead and there's a ranger saying, "Oh, sorry, the trail's closed again." And again, I ask, oh, is the bear back? Yep, the bear's back. The bear is up there just yonder with a carcass on the trail. And that's not a situation that you want to interrupt. It is a grizzly bear, and I guess it was probably lunchtime. Doesn't matter, you don't get between a bear and its meal. So again, I go back to the car and I drive back to Denali. I did have a little birthday dinner in Denali. First of all, I treated myself to a dog-friendly, of course, resort. And they had a great restaurant on site where I had some moose stew it was elk. It was elk stew. It was moose chili that I had with the, I believe it was the elk corn dog with the moose chili. And then I had an elk stew at this really beautiful restaurant. I can't remember everything else that I had, but it was delicious meal. That is one thing about Denali. All of the food that I had, that was kind of like the only time I ate out was in Denali, and the food was pretty darn good. And then I went to the Kenai Fjords, and I drove to the Kenai Fjords, and it was a beautiful drive. Oh my gosh. The drive between Denali down all the way south to the south coast of Alaska to the Kenai Fjords, beautiful. Oh my gosh, it was so pretty. So many mountains. Oh, and the weather was amazing. Weather was really good. And that is where I started feeling a little bit off. I had a lot of plans to explore the Kenai area. Unfortunately, number one, I did have to work that week. And then number two, I was not feeling very good. And at the time I didn't know why, but I would soon figure out why. But I powered my way through that week, and I was only working for the week, and I was gonna explore in my off time. I was gonna explore the weekend after the week that I worked. I was gonna rent a kayak and go kayaking around the fjords. It's gonna be great. And no, that didn't happen. It didn't happen. Because throughout the week I started feeling worse and worse and worse and worse. And then on Friday I went to bed very early and thought, okay, I think I'm getting sick. Something's wrong. And I woke up the next morning so sick. Oh, I just felt awful. I knew before I even opened my eyes that morning. I knew. I drag my aching body out of bed. I hook up the trailer. I start throwing up. I need to get my butt across the border and start home and then figure out what to do. And I get about 20 minutes down the road and my legs start hurting and they feel like they're burning, they're on fire. I'm really sick and I'm pulling over and throwing up like every 20 minutes. Bad. I'm not allowed to cross a border. It is against the law. I have to declare that I'm feeling this way under oath in order to cross the border to go home today. That's not going to happen. I look like death itself. I feel like death itself. This is bad. Oh gosh, what am I gonna do? So I wasn't far from Anchorage, and Anchorage was my best bet at getting to some kind of place where I could settle down and stay and just be sick for a while and figure out how to change my plans. So I start driving to Anchorage. And while I'm driving to Anchorage, mind you, it's like a 3-hour trip from the Kenai Fjords to Anchorage. That turned into like a 7-8 hour trip for me, because not only on the way was I like pulling over, throwing up, I had to take a nap every time that happened, drink, have some food, throw up, take a nap again, drive a little bit, throw up, pull over, take a nap. Horrible cycle. Oh, it was terrible. But I was like, I gotta work my way toward Anchorage, because being this sick in a trailer, like, that's not a good idea. And if I don't have access to, like, you know, and I don't want to like stay in a campground either and like spread whatever I have to other people. And then I figure out most hotels are booked because it's cruise season. Cruise boats full of people are flooding into Alaska every single day. Hotels are generally pretty darn booked up in the cities in the month of July and August in Alaska. Go figure. So it took me a really long time to find a hotel, especially a hotel that's dog friendly, always an issue. And so I get to this hotel. I spend 7 hours fighting my body that so badly wants to die, apparently. I go into this hotel. I'm sorry, we're all booked up and we don't seem to have that name in our reservations. What was your name again? I burst into tears, like, oh, okay, thank you. We got it sorted out, and they did overbook the hotel and they did refund me, but then that left me stranded in a hotel parking lot without any vacancy in the middle of Anchorage, and me just like calling hotels randomly trying to find vacancies for dog-friendly hotels. Eventually, 2 hours later on the phone, I am not in good shape at all. I am sitting in my trailer crying on the phone for 2 hours trying to figure this out. 2 hours later, I show up at a hotel that did happen to have one vacancy. Someone just canceled. And I show up and they're like, oh, I'm so sorry. We're really short-staffed. Your room isn't ready yet. We'll call you in a couple hours, I think, when it's ready. We are now 9 hours into this ordeal, and I need to go back and lay down in my trailer for another couple of hours. They'll call me. 2 hours later, they call me, my room is ready, and I go to the room and I sleep for the next 48 hours. And in that 48 hours, I woke up once and had the presence of mind to order myself some snacks and medicine and some COVID tests, because gosh, I haven't been sick like that ever. And so I get the test, it's positive, okay. What am I gonna do? Because I'm not allowed to cross, again, an international border with COVID. What do I do now? I found a vacation rental with a kitchen and everything available for a week so I could just hunker down, quarantine, get better. I did a little bit of work during that time as well. This is probably one thing that I should have mentioned in the things that you are going to need to survive this trip. It's an emergency fund. It's a fund for emergencies when things like this happen, because let me tell you, having to get a vacation rental at the last minute in Anchorage during high travel season was really not cheap. And it was not in the budget, but it was in the emergency budget that I have for traveling specifically. I was able to make myself comfortable enough to not get sicker, comfortable enough to get better, to take care of myself, to take care of my dog, and to stay safe and in quarantine and keep others safe. I was able to do that because I had an emergency fund. So whether you get sick or maybe your car breaks down in the wilderness and it costs $2,000 to get a tow truck, it's really important, I think, to have an emergency fund for a trip like this, because if things go wrong, it's gonna be helpful to have a little bit of spare cash to solve that problem. The border crossing out of Alaska and into Canada, by the way, the southern border crossing, I can't remember what town it was, but the southern border crossing was an absolute nightmare. Oh my gosh. There were a lot of people. It was a really big line of cars, although It was shorter than I was expecting. It moved way, way slower than I was expecting. So this was back during the time when Arrive Can was a thing. And anyone who crossed the Canadian border at that time probably just shuddered a little bit, because it's an app you have to get on your phone and you have to enter your passport information. You have to declare under penalty of perjury that you are vaccinated, and etc., etc. And it's how Canada managed border crossings and health stuff during the pandemic. And it's no longer a thing, but it caused a lot of problems at border crossings at the time. And this is one of those times where I got caught up in it. And it seems that people just weren't downloading the app. They didn't have their proof of vaccination uploaded, all kinds of problems with the app. And then we're in the middle of nowhere at a border crossing, so the reception isn't that good. So getting one car at a time across the border at that border crossing, some cars would take 20, 30 minutes, and I'm like 30 cars back. So that border crossing ended up taking about 5 hours from the time I pulled up to the time I crossed the border. It was terrible. I desperately wanted a nap. I pulled over and took a nap after I crossed the border. And then from then on, I took a nap every few hours all the way home because I was exhausted. So I took what I called earlier the western route home, and that was beautiful. It was actually a much more scenic drive than the absolutely maddening, time-warpy craziness, brain-breaking craziness that was the eastern route of just the same forest of trees over and over for 5 days. This was a much more diverse set of scenery, and would I drive this route again? Absolutely. Would I drive the eastern route again? I would think twice. Or maybe one day I will have an extra $6,000 laying around to take the ferry. Doubtful. It's very doubtful. It was my favorite route, and it was also the best wildlife. It was the most diverse wildlife. There was one morning I woke up pretty early at the turnout I slept at, and I started driving. And before I saw my first person of the day, I think I saw about half a dozen, like 6, 7 or so bears that morning, including 2 baby bears playing in the road while their mother tried to get them to get out of the way while I sat there and looked at them. So it was the best scenery, it was the best wildlife watching, A+, amazing drive. Oh my gosh, it was beautiful. But this is when I noticed something off. I started seeing billboards everywhere for missing people, specifically female hitchhikers. And I drove by this one billboard that said, "Women don't hitchhike." And it had a little stick figure drawing of someone being stabbed. And it had a few photos of these missing women and their names and their ages when they were last seen. And I drove through a few small towns, and it seemed like every small town had its own different style of billboard for someone who had gone missing from that town or near that town. And so I keep driving, and this is the first time that I skipped out on a gas station. And I skipped out on the gas station because it wasn't necessarily dark, because the days were extremely long still. I was up north far enough that the days were very long and it never got completely pitch dark. But it was later in the day, not a lot of people around, and I passed by a gas station that I fully intended to stop at. And I slowed down and I pulled into the parking lot, but I just kept driving and got back on the highway because there was just one lone sketchy looking character sitting there, and it wasn't super well lit, and I just the hair stood up on the back of my neck, and that was just enough for me to vamoose. And I couldn't find any other gas station in town, and so I thought, okay, the next gas station, I will not make it without fuel, but I have more than enough fuel to get there if I tap into my reserves. So that seems a lot safer. Pulling over and filling up in the middle of nowhere seems a lot safer than pulling into this gas station with this creepy person looking at, So I just kept driving. And I drove for, I don't know, it might have been 5 minutes, it might have been 5 hours. I don't know. We're back in the time warp again, okay? I don't know how long it was before I started to run out of gas, but I pulled over just as I was running out of gas and I start gassing up. And while I am gassing up, a semi-truck comes around the corner and slows way down really, really fast. Makes a lot of noise. I turn around, I look at the guy, I'm still filling up my tank, thinking, oh, what's going on here? And the guy goes, hey! That's my Canadian trucker voice. That's the best I can do. You all right out here? Yeah. All right, well, don't stick around too long. It's not safe. Thank you. So that was weird. And the guy drove off, didn't say anything else, just it's not safe. So is the middle of nowhere without cell phone service for days, without help for a couple hours to a couple of days, is that maybe a vulnerable position to be in? Yes. Yes, it is. I'm not going to lie. It's not safe. It's not a safe thing to do. But neither is like a lot of stuff. It's a lot less safe than sitting at home. You know what I mean? It's maybe more safe than that time I like went hiking at the Grand Canyon. I don't know. But yeah, everything has risks, and that is a special kind of vulnerability to be in the middle of nowhere without cell phone reception, with only the supplies you have on your back and possibly days away from help. Yeah, you need to be concerned about that. Am I afraid of what happened, you know, to the women on the billboards? Heck yeah, I am. I'm not. The last place I want to be is stranded, needing a ride somewhere, but it's not exactly preventable, you know? And so again, I say the aim of the game is to be self-sufficient. If you don't need to stop anywhere, you're not going to encounter anybody. And the fewer people you encounter, potentially the safer you're going to be. Do you want to do everything you can to be in the least vulnerable position possible? Yes, you absolutely do. You should get a tune-up for your car before you leave. You should make sure your tires are good. You know, prevent preventable road emergencies by maintaining and fixing your vehicle before you go on a trip like this. That's like a big safety thing that you can do for yourself is if you don't break down anywhere, you're not gonna have to rely on anyone else but yourself to get you somewhere. Yeah, maintain your vehicle. Maintain that reserve of gas. And then one more thing that I have that can cross a border, one other safety thing is get a personal locator beacon. This is a fast find, but you can get any personal locator beacon. They kind of vary in price from like $60 to like $300 depending on how fancy you want to get. But basically it's just a little GPS beacon that will ping your location to, I want to make sure I get this right. It will ping your location to the National Oceanic Administration, and you register this beacon with them, and you register an emergency contact, you register your address so they know who you are. If they ever get this beacon signal, they will know you are in distress and come find you. So at least if you get into some trouble and it's an emergency, you can at least communicate your last location to somebody and communicate at the same time that you are in some trouble. I have never had to use this, although I have bought a couple of these for friends that I care very much about, whomst I got into adventures, and so I feel some obligation to their safety. Makes a great gift for people that you have anxiety about in your life. One other important thing, at least I think it was important that I did for my safety, it felt good at the time, was camping at turnouts that already had one or two people already there for the night. And I found that if I pulled into one of those turnouts, more people would pull in throughout the night. And there is some safety in numbers. I did not like the idea, although I did it a couple of times. I didn't like the idea of camping in a turnout by myself, because keep in mind, there's not a lot of like crossroads on these highways. Like, these are a couple of highways that run north-south for hundreds and hundreds of miles without anything connecting them. You will encounter people that you will see over and over and over again. And when you encounter the same people over and over again, it is easier for them to tell that I'm traveling by myself. And I would hate to be camping on a turnout somewhere by myself and someone sees that as an opportunity because they saw me 1 or 2 days before that I was traveling by myself, because they saw me at the gas station and they recognized my vehicle, which is somewhat distinctive. I felt better sleeping in turnouts that already had people at them. It also helps, I actually suggest this for anyone going on travels, even if you are not traveling alone, even if you're traveling with a couple of people, it's always a good idea to have your own point person. I call my home base person, who is aware of my itinerary and whom I have agreed to check in with. These are people who I trust to call somebody or do something and pass along the information in a timely fashion should I not check in on an agreed upon time. And we usually agree how long they're gonna wait before they call for help, etc., etc. I will usually send them my document that is my detailed itinerary, so they will know where I planned to be when I plan to be there, and so they can give to authorities, if something happens to me, all of the information that would be useful in tracking me down and finding me and making sure. So home-based person, very important, trusted individual. Now, one thing I want to mention, and it's because people ask me this so much, probably because I'm from the United States, and people from the United States are obsessed with their weapons, is what kind of weapons do I bring with me to stay safe? Now, I need to say this. You are responsible for knowing the laws wherever you are traveling and through the places you are traveling to get there, and it is your responsibility to follow those laws. So what I will tell you is that I follow the law everywhere I go, and sometimes that means doing a lot of research. Sometimes that means I go so many places and I cross so many boundaries, like on this trip, I don't know what the laws are and I can't keep track of them all, so I don't really bring any weapons, per se. The weapon that I bring that is pretty much allowed anywhere is my dog. My dog is a deterrent to people, so I might be traveling alone, but I'm not traveling alone. I have a dog that looks like she will rip your face off. So that is one safety feature that you can pretty reliably take most places. Granted, dogs are not typically allowed in national parks, and at least if they are allowed in national parks, they're kind of only allowed in parking lots and stuff. So it's not a weapon you're gonna take into a national park, but a dog can be a good deterrent to anyone who might be considering trying anything if you are a lone traveler. It's a very easy weapon to travel with, let me tell you. The other thing I take with me that is also allowed across the border is a tactical pen, which is just a really thick steel pen that has a sharp point on the end of it. I keep that in my center console in my truck, so I always have it handy. That's one thing that is allowed most places. Probably not your carry-on bag at the airport, but maybe in your check bag, I don't know. Is it a weapon that does a lot of damage? No, but is it a weapon that could buy you a few seconds to escape? Yes. Yes, it can. Especially when your dog is also like chewing on the person's leg. It's a good combination, the dog and the tactical pen, I think. Speaking of weapons, bear spray is not allowed across the border. Knives, machetes, stuff like that, not allowed across the border. And probably goes without saying in almost every single possible circumstance, except for like 2 very highly specific circumstances, guns are not allowed across the Canadian border. For my American friends, yeah, do your research. The gun situation in Canada is not as it is in America. You should not make any assumptions before traveling across the border with one. Just saying, do your homework. Okay, so do I recommend taking this trip? Yes, absolutely. Despite all of the risks, despite the time warp brain mush I suffered from, that was probably a combination of driving for 5 straight days and then having COVID for 5 days. Whatever, it was still worth it, and I will probably do it again someday. Do I recommend you do it? If you have the means and opportunity to drive to Alaska from the United States, absolutely yes, do it. Even if you might be a little bit apprehensive, there's a lot of risk that can be entirely mitigated and prevented if with just a little bit of planning and forethought and a little bit of research. There are a lot of highway travel guides out there. If you're really afraid of like getting lost and of not having cell phone service, buy a printed guide. It's fine. As long as you prepare to be self-sufficient and your vehicle's in good condition, there's no reason to be worried about a trip here. So the best you can do for yourself is to monitor the highway conditions. The authorities are very good about communicating highway conditions through the channels that they have. Check the highway conditions every day. If you have enough cell phone service, check them multiple times a day. Check the highway conditions every time you have cell phone service, honestly, especially during fire season, which is really all of driving season now, it seems like. So monitor the conditions, be self-sufficient, plan ahead, and you're gonna be just fine, and prepare to see like a lot of bears. Stay away from the bears. You don't want to share the trail with bears. So I hope you enjoyed being a passenger with me on this epic journey. Maybe we'll get to do it again someday. Maybe we'll get to stay a little bit longer. Maybe we'll have some more adventures. Maybe we'll spend a little bit more time in Denali. Who knows? Maybe I'll make the drive someday. But I don't think I'll ever be keen on paying for that ferry. I don't think you could talk me into that. Ever. No, I think I'm still gonna pass on the ferry.